The courtroom was silent, heavy with tension, as the judge adjusted his glasses and prepared to hear yet another motion. Lawyers shuffled papers, whispers filled the benches, and the atmosphere was that of a battlefield where only those with the sharpest words and deepest pockets survived. Then, something happened that no one could have predicted. A small voice cut through the air, pure and fearless. Every head turned. Standing there was a boy, no older than 9, his fists clenched, his eyes blazing with determination. He stepped forward, looked directly at the judge, and declared, "I'll be my mom's lawyer." The room froze. Gasps rippled across the crowd. Even the opposing attorney dropped his pen in disbelief. The judge, startled, leaned forward. "Son, do you understand what you're saying?" But the boy didn't waver. His little frame stood tall, his voice steady. He spoke with the kind of fire that even seasoned lawyers struggled to muster. "My mom doesn't need a lawyer. She already has me." The audience held its breath. His mother's eyes brimmed with tears as she tried to rise, whispering for him to sit down. But he wouldn't. He continued, his words striking deeper than any legal argument. "Truth doesn't need a suit or a degree, it just needs courage to be spoken. And if standing up for my mother is wrong, then I never want to be right." For a moment, the entire courtroom seemed suspended in time. The judge's gavel rested motionless in his hand. The opposing lawyer shifted uncomfortably, unable to meet the boy's gaze. Finally, the boy's voice cracked with emotion. But he pressed on, "Adults may know the law, but children know love, and love never lies. This courtroom isn't just about rules, it's about justice. And justice is what my mom deserves today." Silence. Then, something extraordinary happened. The judge slowly removed his glasses, his stern expression softening. The jury exchanged glances, visibly moved, and in the benches behind, strangers wiped away tears. What happened next left everyone speechless. The judge leaned forward and said quietly but firmly, "Son, today you reminded this court what justice truly means." With a trembling voice, he ruled in favor of the boy's mother. The room erupted, not in applause, but in stunned, respectful silence. The little boy walked back to his mother, and as he wrapped his arms around her, she whispered through tears, "You just won the biggest case of my life. My mom doesn't need a lawyer. She already has me." Those words carried more weight than anyone in that courtroom could have imagined. At first, they sounded almost innocent, like something a child might say out of pure devotion. But the tone in which he spoke them changed everything. It wasn't the naive voice of a little boy who didn't understand the seriousness of the situation. It was the voice of someone who knew exactly what was at stake, and was willing to step into a storm that no child should ever have to face. When he said it, there was no hesitation, no glance toward the ground, no tremble of fear in his voice. He stood tall for his age, his small chest rising as if it carried the strength of something far greater than himself. He looked at the judge directly, as though speaking to the highest authority in the room wasn't intimidating at all. The people around him froze because they could sense something extraordinary was happening. To him, this wasn't about legal degrees, arguments, or courtroom etiquette. To him, it was about love. The kind of love that didn't recognize boundaries or limitations. In his mind, lawyers were supposed to protect their clients, to speak for them when they couldn't speak for themselves. And wasn't that what he had been doing his whole life? Protecting his mom. Standing by her. Watching her work late. Watching her cry quietly when she thought he wasn't looking. Watching her fight battles no one else seemed to notice. If that was what being a lawyer meant, then who else could possibly do it better than him? When he spoke those words, the effect rippled through the courtroom. The opposing attorney, who had moments earlier been shuffling through his notes with the confidence of someone who believed he had already won, suddenly froze. He glanced toward the boy, his expression caught somewhere between disbelief and unease. It wasn't that the boy's statement carried any legal significance. It was that it carried moral significance. It reminded everyone in that room that sometimes truth doesn't come from the people with the loudest voices, but from those with the purest hearts. The mother's eyes filled instantly with tears. She reached out her hand, her lips trembling as she tried to whisper his name, almost begging him to sit down. But deep down, even as her heart ached with fear for him, she knew there was no stopping him. He had already made up his mind. In that moment, she saw not just her little boy, but the man he was destined to become. Fearless, loyal, and unwilling to let anyone silence him when it came to what he believed was right. The judge leaned back, his expression difficult to read. Judges hear countless arguments every day. They hear lawyers twist words, exaggerate, or even manipulate facts to serve their clients. But rarely did they hear words that cut straight through all of it. This boy wasn't appealing to law books or statutes. He was appealing to something far more ancient, the human heart's instinct to protect what it loves. And while the boy may not have known the complexities of the law, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. His mother was innocent in spirit. Whatever technicalities had brought her into that courtroom, whatever accusations or claims had been leveled against her, He believed she didn't deserve to be there. He wasn't willing to watch quietly while adults decided her fate without considering what she meant to him. In his world, she wasn't just the defendant or the accused. She was his mom, his protector, his teacher, his anchor. And he was going to return the favor in the only way he knew how, by becoming her voice. The words lingered in the air long after he spoke them. People in the gallery shifted uncomfortably, some lowering their eyes, others nodding slowly, as if reminded of something they had long forgotten. It was a simple sentence, but it carried the kind of truth that needed no embellishment. In that one declaration, the boy had taken on a role larger than himself. He had become more than just a witness to his mother's struggle. He had become her advocate, her shield, her champion. And though he may not have had a degree to prove it, in that moment, he became exactly what he said he was, her lawyer. Truth doesn't need a suit or a degree, it just needs courage to be spoken. The words landed in the courtroom like a thunderclap. For a moment, the room felt stripped of its formality. No polished wooden benches, no towering shelves of law books, no carefully pressed robes or expensive suits. All of that suddenly seemed small compared to the force of a boy's conviction. His statement challenged the very foundation of the setting. After all, wasn't this a place where trained professionals, armed with years of study and experience, were supposed to dominate? Yet here stood a child, with no certificate to his name, telling everyone that truth didn't belong to titles, diplomas or wealth. Truth belonged to courage. The silence that followed was heavy but not empty, it was charged. People glanced at one another, unsure how to react. Some shifted uneasily, as though the boy had peeled back a layer of pretense they didn't want exposed. Others leaned forward, their eyes locked on him, as though they were watching history unfold. Even the judge, a man accustomed to maintaining complete authority, lowered his gaze for a brief moment. He was used to lawyers citing precedents and statutes, not children shattering illusions with raw honesty. The boy didn't flinch. He had learned early in life that people often confuse sophistication with truth. He had seen grown-ups lie with confidence, dressing falsehoods in complicated words. He had seen others believe them simply because they carried authority or credentials. But he had also seen his mother, working with blistered hands, sacrificing her own comfort for his, living proof that honesty and love require no decoration. For him, truth was simple. It was not owned by those with the best arguments, it was owned by those brave enough to say it out loud. His voice carried the weight of lived experience, not academic training. That's what made it pierce deeper. When he said truth doesn't need a suit, he was stripping away the symbols of power that often silence ordinary people. In his mind, a truth spoken from a child's mouth was just as strong, if not stronger, than one delivered by a seasoned lawyer. It didn't matter that he was small or young. What mattered was that he dared to speak when silence would have been easier. His mother buried her face in her hands, trembling, torn between pride and fear. She wanted to protect him from the harshness of the world, but she also knew this moment was bigger than either of them. Her son was doing what most adults never found the courage to do. Standing in front of authority and saying words that could not be ignored. The opposing attorney coughed, trying to regain his composure, but the unease on his face betrayed him. His carefully crafted arguments suddenly felt hollow compared to a boy's unpolished honesty. He had prepared for logic, for evidence, for counterarguments, but he hadn't prepared for truth to be delivered so plainly, with no ulterior motive. And that was the essence of the boy's power: purity. When truth is spoken without agenda, without fear of loss or hope of gain, it carries an undeniable force. It silences the noise of complexity and strikes at the heart of human conscience. The boy wasn't trying to win a case for fame or money. He was trying to defend the one person who had given everything for him. That made his words untouchable. Even the spectators felt it. A woman sitting in the back row dabbed her eyes with a tissue. A man who had entered the courtroom bored and uninterested now sat at the edge of his seat. It wasn't about the case anymore. It was about something universal. They all recognized themselves in that boy. Times when they had stayed silent instead of speaking the truth. Times when they had let titles and appearances intimidate them into submission. His courage was exposing their own regrets. The judge finally raised his head, his expression unreadable, but his eyes softer than before. He didn't interrupt, because he knew he couldn't. This wasn't a statement to be silenced or dismissed as childish. It was a reminder, even to him, that beneath all the procedures and rituals of law, the real purpose of a courtroom was to uncover truth. And here it was, standing bravely before him, delivered not by a seasoned advocate, but by a boy whose heart was unshaken. The boy's words echoed in the quiet: truth doesn't need a suit or a degree. In a world obsessed with appearances and authority, it was a radical declaration. He had stripped truth of its disguises and shown it for what it really was: raw, fearless, undeniable. And in that moment, every single person in that courtroom understood something they might never admit out loud. Sometimes, the smallest voices carry the greatest truths. If standing up for my mother is wrong, then I never want to be right. The boy's words sliced through the courtroom with a defiance that no one expected from someone so young. He didn't shout them, nor did he whisper, he spoke with a steady force that came from the deepest part of his being. It was not the kind of defiance born from rebellion or arrogance, but from a pure, unshakable loyalty that knew no compromise. In that moment, the statement wasn't just about his mother. It was about the essence of love itself, a love that was willing to be misunderstood, judged, or even condemned, as long as it meant standing by her side. People stared at him bewildered. In a room built on rules, regulations, and rigid codes of conduct, the boy's declaration carried a strange kind of power. It wasn't logical in the way lawyers framed arguments, but it was unbreakable in a way that logic could never match. He was essentially saying, if protecting my mother costs me approval, then let me be disapproved. If loyalty means breaking the expectations of this place, then I will break them proudly. That kind of clarity made grown men shift uneasily in their seats. His mother gasped softly, clutching her chest. She wanted to stop him, to tell him not to speak against the weight of the system, but her voice failed her. Deep down, she knew she had raised him to be exactly this brave. She had taught him right from wrong, but she had also shown him that true love never abandons. Now, he was turning that lesson back on her in a way she never imagined. Declaring that even if the world painted him as wrong, he would embrace it if it meant protecting her. The judge studied him carefully, his hand frozen midair above the gavel. It was clear that he understood the boy wasn't just making a childish outburst. This was a choice. A 9-year-old was telling a room full of adults that he valued loyalty over approval, love over law, justice over reputation. In many ways, that was the kind of moral courage courts claimed to honor but rarely saw displayed with such raw honesty. The boy's words also exposed something uncomfortable about the adults present. How many times had they compromised truth for convenience? How many times had they chosen silence when speaking up might have cost them their jobs, their status, or their comfort? Here was a child, ready to risk being ridiculed or punished simply for defending his mother's dignity. The purity of his stand forced them to look inward, and many didn't like what they saw. The opposing lawyer shifted in his seat, trying to maintain composure. He had walked into that room confident in his ability to dismantle arguments with facts and strategy, but this was different. This wasn't an argument, it was a vow. It could not be debated, only felt. He realized quickly that no matter how precise his words, no matter how sharp his logic, nothing he said would ever carry the same weight as the boy's fearless devotion. The gallery sat still, as though the air had thickened. A few spectators lowered their eyes, perhaps recalling moments in their own lives when they had chosen to protect themselves rather than someone they loved. Others nodded faintly, acknowledging that they understood the boy's message. That true loyalty often requires sacrifice, and that sometimes doing what's right in the heart looks wrong in the eyes of the world. The boy's eyes never wavered. He wasn't afraid of disapproval, he wasn't afraid of punishment. What he feared was something far greater. The idea of letting his mother face hardship alone. He couldn't accept it, and he wouldn't allow it. If the cost of standing up for her was being seen as reckless or wrong, then he embraced that cost without hesitation. That kind of courage didn't need validation, it was its own reward. His words lingered in the air, more powerful than any testimony could have been. It was as if he had turned the very foundation of the courtroom on its head. Rules could dictate behavior, but they couldn't touch love. Procedures could outline what was allowed, but they couldn't dictate what was right in the heart. And the boy had just proven it with a single sentence: standing by his mother was worth everything, even if the world chose to condemn him for it. Adults may know the law, but children know love, and love never lies. The boy's words fell into the silence like a truth no one had dared to speak before. For a moment, the courtroom felt less like a place of rules and judgments, and more like a stage where the simplest, purest voice exposed what everyone else had forgotten. He wasn't dismissing the knowledge of adults, he was reminding them of something more fundamental. Adults had experience, degrees, and authority. They could recite laws, interpret precedents, and argue definitions. But in chasing knowledge, they often overlooked the one thing that couldn't be taught in books: love. The way he said it carried no arrogance, only certainty. He was young, but his eyes shone with a clarity that made even seasoned professionals shift in their seats. He wasn't claiming to know everything, he was pointing out that what he did know was enough. Children see the world without the layers of politics, greed, or pride that cloud adult judgment. To him, love was the highest law, and in love there was no deceit. If he loved his mother and believed in her goodness, then that was a truth no cross-examination could dismantle. His mother covered her mouth, her shoulders trembling. She had taught him to be kind, to be honest, to value people over possessions. But she never expected him to turn those lessons into a weapon of such strength. To her, those words were more powerful than any legal defense could ever be. because they came from a place of innocence adults rarely honored. The judge leaned back, expression unreadable, but his eyes betrayed something: recognition. He had spent decades buried in cases, arguments, and technicalities, yet when the boy spoke, it stirred a memory in him, perhaps of his own childhood, before he learned how to hide behind formality, before he learned how to bend truths to fit into rules. Maybe it reminded him of his children, or grandchildren, and the way their honesty always cut straight to the heart of things. Lawyers on both sides froze. They had been trained to believe that the strongest voice in any courtroom came from knowledge and authority. But here was a boy proving otherwise. He had no diploma, no title, no years of experience. All he had was love, and it was enough to shake the foundation of their arguments. Because love, when spoken honestly, carried no hidden agenda. It didn't try to win points, impress a jury, or outwit an opponent. It simply told the truth. People in the gallery leaned forward, hanging on to his words. Some felt a lump in their throat. They realized he was right. Adults might know the technicalities, but they often lost sight of what really mattered. Children, untainted by selfish ambition, didn't need to study to recognize love. They felt it, they trusted it, and when they spoke from it, there was no trace of falsehood. The boy wasn't testifying about evidence or procedures. He was testifying about something deeper: the bond between a child and his mother, a bond unshaken by fear or doubt. The opposing attorney clenched his jaw, frustrated but unable to dismiss the impact of the boy's words. He could have argued law all day, but how could he argue against love without looking cold, even cruel? He understood, in that moment, that the boy had shifted the ground beneath everyone's feet. The case no longer felt like a legal battle, it felt like a moral reckoning. The boy stood unflinching. He didn't stumble over words, because he wasn't performing, he was simply telling what he knew. To him love was a compass, and compasses don't lie. He might not have understood the intricacies of contracts, statutes, or objections, but he knew his mother's heart. He knew her sacrifices, her sleepless nights, her tireless work to protect and provide for him. That knowledge was unshakable, and it gave him the courage to say what no adult in the room dared to. Love is the truest witness of all. His words hung in the air like a challenge to everyone listening. Could they, with all their wisdom and experience, claim to know something purer than what this boy was declaring? Could any law book outweigh the certainty in his voice? No one dared answer, because deep down, they already knew the truth. Children may not know everything, but when they speak from love, they speak without lies. This courtroom isn't just about rules. It's about justice, and justice is what my mom deserves today. The boy's words rang out with a conviction that unsettled everyone in the room. He was small, standing in a space designed for battles between seasoned professionals, yet his voice carried with it a weight that forced people to pause. He wasn't quoting from any law book, nor was he leaning on complicated arguments. Instead, he reached for something deeper, something courts often claimed to serve but sometimes forgot: justice itself. The distinction he made was powerful. Rules were necessary, yes, but they were only tools. Justice was the goal. Yet somewhere along the way, adults had become so consumed with following the rules that they often forgot why those rules existed in the first place. The boy, with his simple honesty, cut through that fog. He was reminding everyone that the law wasn't meant to trap the innocent or confuse the truth. It was meant to protect the good, to defend the vulnerable, to give fairness where life had been unfair. When he said those words, the gallery fell into silence. Some people lowered their heads as though ashamed. Others straightened, struck by how easily he revealed the heart of the matter. The lawyers present, armed with arguments and strategies, suddenly seemed small compared to a child who dared to call out the difference between legality and justice. The judge's eyes narrowed, not in anger but in reflection. He knew better than anyone that rules could sometimes be bent, stretched, or even twisted to serve those who had power. But justice, true justice, was harder to manipulate. It was not bound by loopholes or technicalities, it lived in fairness, in conscience, in the raw pursuit of what was right. The boy's words forced him to confront a truth he had buried under years of procedure. Justice was supposed to be the heartbeat of the courtroom, not just a word carved into its walls. The boy's mother trembled, her tears slipping silently down her cheeks. She knew the system was complex, often unfair, and sometimes merciless. But hearing her son speak with such clarity made her believe for the first time in years that perhaps justice could still be found in that place. His words didn't just defend her, they defended the very purpose of why a courtroom existed. The opposing attorney clenched his pen, his arguments suddenly feeling hollow. He had prepared his case based on rules, on technical interpretations that painted the mother in an unfavorable light. But as the boy spoke, he realized something dangerous. The jury wasn't just listening with their minds. They were listening with their hearts. And when hearts are stirred, even the strongest arguments can collapse. For the spectators, it was like witnessing something sacred. They came expecting legal jargon, motions, and counterarguments. Instead, They were reminded of the one thing they had always hoped courts would stand for: fairness. The boy's words echoed inside them, reminding them of times in their own lives when rules were followed but justice was denied, when truth was overlooked in favor of procedure. His voice gave form to their unspoken frustrations, and in doing so, he became larger than himself. The child didn't waver. He looked at the judge, his eyes unwavering, and repeated the essence of his message in the strength of his silence: rules alone mean nothing if they don't create justice. To him, the case wasn't complicated. His mother deserved fairness because she had done no wrong. He didn't need years of study to see that. His heart told him all he needed to know. And in that pure conviction, he spoke a truth more piercing than any legal argument could ever achieve. His words lingered, not just in the courtroom, but in the conscience of everyone who heard them. For a brief moment, the walls of law and procedure seemed to fade, and what stood in their place was the very reason justice was supposed to exist: to protect the innocent, to give voice to the voiceless, and to ensure that love and truth would never be silenced by technicalities. The boy had reminded them all of that with a single unshakable declaration: "My mom doesn't need a lawyer, she already has me. Truth doesn't need a suit or a degree, it just needs courage to be spoken. If standing up for my mother is wrong, then I never want to be right." Adults may know the law, but children know love, and love never lies. This courtroom isn't just about rules, it's about justice, and justice is what my mom deserves today.